So I'm going to then now talk about some of the species that medicinally I find to be most fascinating. This is in Scotland. This is a beech tree, a big one, and that's one of the biggest chaga that I've ever seen. A chaga is a weird mushroom. This is actually not really a sclerotia. It's not a fruiting body. It's a sterile mass that forms on the birch tree. And this has been medicinally ballyhooed by a lot of people over the centuries, and typically it's been extracted in hot water. The mushrooms are incredibly, the mushroom forms are incredibly tough, so they've got to be pounded up. And then hot water extraction is used, boiling the mushrooms in water. Well, that's what our ancestors did for thousands of years. So the hot water extract pulls out a lot of interesting proteins, glycoproteins, and polysaccharides. Water is the most polar of solvents, and the less polar solvents pull out lipids, sterols, and terpenes. Well, water being a solvent, you partition some beneficial properties away from many other beneficial properties. So with our advent of being able to cultivate mycelium in the laboratory, it gives us an opportunity now of using other solvents to extract other compounds, which pharmacologically and from immune support and antiviral activity, this group of sterols and lipids has gotten us very, very excited. So I love traditional Chinese medicine, but they're not always right all the time. They advocate only hot water extracts. That's really changed now because in the past 5 or 10 years, these other solvent extractions are isolating constituents that are pharmacologically very, very beneficial. So this article came out on chaga, a twice hot water extracted chaga, and it protected DNA, 40% reduction in the DNA fragmentation compared to the positive control. Unbeknownst to us, a group of physicians in Britain ordered our chaga extract, and they published this article, and we found out about it later, that from the mycelium, from water and ethanol extraction, using a similar methodology, we protected DNA fragmentation by more than 55%, with high significance. The reason why I mention this is that cultivation of chaga in the laboratory is sustainable. And now there's been a gold rush of people going into the forest with hatchets, hatcheting off the chaga, leaving a very big scar in the tree that's very easy for insects to get into. It's very hard for insects to get into the tree via this big mass. But when you take the mass off, it's softened tissue, so it's a port of entry. Well, so this is something that I don't mind people getting chaga for their, a specimen for their living room or whatnot, but I'm very much opposed to the wild harvesting of chaga. It has now been devastating forests all over the world, and you used to be able to get 500 kilos of chaga, from Russia and China, and now the most you can get is like 5 kilos because they've cut down all the easy to obtain chaga near the roads and the forests, and I think this is a potentially devastating impact into the forest ecosystem, although there's been no studies yet to date to prove that one way or the other. Another mushroom I want to emphasize is the enoki-taki, Flammularia volutipes, also another species called Flammularia populicula. This is a great sort of universal truth of us mushroom cultivators, is light determines the diameter of the cap, carbon dioxide controls the length of the stem. So and in the CO2 environment that's rich in the soil, the mushrooms come up with a long stem, and then the cap is produced, but light determines the diameter of the cap. So the enoki mushrooms you are finding in the stores are grown in low light conditions, high carbon dioxide conditions. They grow up in these bundles. Well, enoki mushrooms were really the vanguard species that brought to the attention of the Western medical practitioners that mushrooms are good for the immune system. Dr. Ikikawa is a physician that works for the National Cancer Center in Tokyo. And he was sent to the Nagano prefecture because there was a dearth in overall cancer deaths, a statistically significant drop compared to the other regions of Japan. He went there for about 18 months, and he did an epidemiological study on what was happening in the Nagano prefecture. Now, about 160 people per 100,000 per year in Japan die from cancer. We're around 200 or something like that. Men are dying more frequently than women. And then when he narrowed it down, he found that the population drop in cancer was really due to a group of enoki mushroom cultivators and their families. Now, we grow lots of mushrooms. Many of you have gardens. Some of you may be farmers. And you don't sell what we call the blems, the blemished ones that have a little insect bite or a little bacterial blotch on it. We cut that off, we eat them ourselves. So the enoki growers and their families had a many times higher per capita consumption of mushrooms than the surrounding population. Well, after an exhaustive study, this is what he found. 174,000 people in this study, and was able to determine a statistically significant drop in overall cancer across the board from the high-frequency consumption of enoki mushrooms compared to the surrounding population. This was published in a Western medical journal, and I think is the first article that really alerted immunologists in the West that mushrooms can help enhance the immune system. Well, there's another mushroom that I'm really excited about, and it's called the lion's mane mushroom. Now, the lion's mane mushroom may be the first smart mushroom. Lion's mane mushrooms contain a novel nerve growth stimulant factors that regenerate myelin on the axons of nerves. And demyelination leads to neuropathies. And so MS, Parkinson's disease, and Alzheimer's in particular, demyelinization co-occurs with amyloid plaque formation, interfering with the transmission of the nerve signals on the outer sheath of the axons. So Dr. Kawagishi gets credit for this. I have no idea how he discovered it. But he isolated that this nerve growth stimulant factor called erinacines, named after the mushroom Hericium erinaceus, and hericinones, also named after the genus Hericium, are some of the most potent nerve growth stimulant factors ever seen and ever discovered. More recently, and I have 12 articles in the Huffington Post. If you Google my name, Stamets, in the Huffington Post, it goes through peer review. The articles are only 1,600 words or less by limit. And I have all the references in there, and you can grab these articles if you wish. All this information's in there. But there's two other articles came out, which is one small clinical study that showed a mild cognitive improvement from eating lion's mane mushrooms. But these two mouse studies are fascinating. And what they did is they took these mice, 100 mice, and they put them in a Y test, where they put them in an arena, and there's a corridor, and the Y splits. Left is food, left is no food. The mice very quickly figured out if they want to get food, go left. Then after they got a big data set, high significance, as a baseline, then they injected the mice with an amyloid plaque, a polypeptide, that caused demyelination and induced amyloid plaque formation, which is what Alzheimer's patients get. Upon death and autopsy, the amyloid plaque formation confirms that your loved one died from Alzheimer's. Symptomatically, you can make that diagnosis to a good degree as well. So then they injected the amyloid plaque, and then after about 2 to 3 weeks, the mice randomized. They went to the Y test, they couldn't figure out which way to go. When they took those, and then upon dissection, they saw the amyloid plaque formation, demyelination, so they could prove that, yes, they had neuropathy. And then they started feeding those sick mice lion's mane mushrooms. And 21 to 23 days later, the mice then had neuropathy largely resolved, renormalized, and remembered which way in the branch to find the food. Now, moreover, they did another experiment, which I find even more fascinating, and it was called, it was a creativity and imagination experiment, where they put the 100 mice in an arena, and they put a new toy in the middle of the arena. Well, the mice go up and they snip it, and they make contact with it. There were stopwatches counting how many points of contact for how long. And they built this really big data set. Well, they did the same thing. They injected the mice with amyloid plaque, with this compound, polypeptide that causes amyloid plaque. Then after a few weeks, when they put a new object in the middle of the arena, the mice were not interested. They lost curiosity. They lost their inquisitiveness. With those mice, then they fed them the lion's mane mushroom. After about 3 weeks, what happened? They put a new object in the maze, they regained curiosity and inquisitiveness, and the mice then came back to near baseline of where they were before the Alzheimer's-like symptoms. Upon dissection, they found that remyelination of the nerves occurred, and the amyloid plaque had largely resolved. This is huge. This is huge. So I think this is the first, smart mushroom. And the tragedy of getting our elders, at the end of their life, they have encyclopedic knowledge, but they lose so much of it. So this is a mushroom that I personally take on a daily basis. I don't know if I'm smarter or not, but I certainly, when we're in a mycological society here, we're speaking to the choir. So, so this is what we face, in our basically the numbers are similar. From breast cancer, prostate cancer, heart disease, we have a decline in deaths because of better medicine. But Alzheimer's-related diseases are surging. This is from the Alzheimer's Institute. This is the population of the world, over 20% over the age of 65 today. This is what it looks like in 2050. We have an aging population across the planet. And so dementia, neuropathies, Alzheimer's, this is a plague that is sweeping the population. It's going to stress the medical system. So everything we can do to help prevent these neuropathies, I think, are really important. We've been working with Emory Medical School, specifically analyzing different strains to see how much aranacine there is. The rice control, there's none, obviously. And then we have quite a significant variation. We have about 700 species and strains in our cultural library. We have and we compare strains for their different properties. Another species is Hericium abiatus. It's a bear's head mushroom, grows on conifers. And this mushroom also contains some of those nerve growth stimulant factors. And conclusively, I can make the case, because this is my brother Bill. He's a very smart guy. He eats lion's mane mushrooms, right? So, of course, just kidding. So there are other mushrooms that, again, from our ancestors' selection through the library of knowledge of 14,000 species, we're learning how these mushrooms can benefit us. We were funded by NIH for a $2.2 million breast cancer clinical study using turkey tail mushrooms. I was one of the co-principal investigators, one of the authors on the grant. The grant was awarded. We got $2.2 million to do the study on turkey tail mushrooms, the best well-studied medicinal mushroom in the world, by the way. Then they asked us, well, where can we get our mushrooms? And I said, well, get them from us. We know the process from beginning to end, and there's so many pitfalls that people don't know about. And they said, well, you can't be a peer reviewer, you can't be a principal investigator and a supplier. So I resigned as a principal investigator, became a supplier. And they said, well, how do we know that yours are any better than ones from China or Japan or elsewhere? So they did an ex vivo test. We came out #1, thankfully. And so we were chosen as a sole source supplier for this breast cancer clinical study. Now, to put this in context, this is kind of the interesting news. 73% of all cancer drugs have origins in natural products. Gordon Craig and David Newman, former director of the National Cancer Institute. We all have cancer all the time. 41% of us will get detectable cancer. 21% of us will die from cancer. Look around you. 1 out of 4 of you are approximately going to die from cancer. So how do we tip the balance? Nature is a numbers game. There's many coefficient multipliers on this side of the equation, and that result in health or disease. We're constantly in a state of disequilibrium, trying to marshal the resources of coefficients that can help us overcome disease and to keep us healthy. So we have concluded this clinical study, and here is a significant chart from it. And this is prior to radiation. This is with ER positive breast cancer patients, estrogen responsive positive. And this is prior to radiation. This is a natural killer cell population as determined in blood analysis. At 3 grams of turkey tail mycelium versus 6 grams, there's a dose-dependent increase in the production of natural killer cells. So then after radiation, your immune system's impaired. It's been damaged. And so there's post-radiation, and then 2 weeks later, on a dose-dependent basis, then the immune system rebounds. Not only is natural killer cells, but cytotoxic T cells increases significantly in parallel with the increase in natural killer cells, your 2 front lines immunologically in being able to fight off cancer. So this was huge. Now, this study was published 2 years ago, but it went on for about 7 years, the term from the beginning to end. And in the course of this study, my mother calls up. And my mother is a charismatic Christian. She hasn't seen a doctor since 1968. She called me up and she was crying on the phone. I didn't even know who it was at first. And I said, who is this? And she said, Paul, this is your mother. I'm so scared. I go, I thought she got a car accident. I go, what's wrong? What's wrong? She goes, I've been wanting to talk to you, but you're always so busy. And I go, oh, I'm never busy enough for you, Mom. I'm always here. And she goes, I go, what's wrong? She goes, my right breast is 5 times the size of my left. I have 6 angry lymph nodes in my right side. They're swollen and dark and colored. I said, I'm so scared. And I go, why didn't you talk to me sooner? They had a charismatic Christian with a Nomarski phase light microscope look at her blood. They prayed on her and she was healed. Well, that obviously didn't work. And I said, Mom, we got to get you to the Swedish breast cancer clinic in Seattle right away. So I rushed her to Seattle. Upon the second visit, we got the worst news that one could expect. It crossed the meridian, invaded her liver and her sternum. And so the tumors, one tumor was bursting through her breasts. And we sat down, and the oncologist lady said, you know, it's the second worst case of breast cancer I've seen in 20 years of practice. You really should have been treated several years ago. But ma'am, you know, you're 83, 84 years of age. You've lived a long life. I see women with their lives are stolen from them into their 40s and 50s. You have a highly aggressive form of cancer. We can't do a mastectomy. We can't do radiation therapy because of the likelihood of infection. And so she said, you should make amends now, you know, and plan. So we had the circle meeting. Some of you have gone through this. My mother chose the cheapest casket she could find because she was going to the Lord. You know, she chose the pink dress to wear. We chose the hymns. This is, you know, I mean, she was so organized. That was incredibly how organized she was. And then on the third visit, you know, the doctor said, you know, it's getting worse, Patty. You know, we can't do anything for you. But, you know, there's an interesting clinical study with medicinal mushrooms, you know, at the University of Minnesota. If your immune system could kick in, you might be able to beat this, you know. And this, my mother said, well, my son's been talking about this, but she wouldn't hear it from me. She had to hear it from a doctor. So my mother was put on Taxol briefly, had a horrible reaction, refused to take it. She was put on Herceptin, a wonderful drug, and she started taking 6 to 8 grams of turkey tail mushrooms per day. Well, so this is my mother, and this is...
Hi, Paul. Everything's go. Everything's wonderful. Past all with flying colors. So thank you for your prayers. I love you, and I'll check in with you later. Bye-bye.
My mother now is just approaching 6 years, totally disease-free with no detectable tumors whatsoever.